Greetings, historians, and welcome back to How Society is Historian. A good buddy of mine, Levi Rennick, sent me a video from a fellow YouTuber, Thinking Critical. The video that he made was all about continuity in comic books. There was a lot of ideas thrown about, and he wanted to know my thought on what they were saying, whether I agreed with them, whether I disagreed with them, and after watching the video a couple times now, I really wanted to make a reactionary video to my thoughts to what they said in the video. So for you, the viewer, if you want to take a look at what they said, go over to Thinking Critical and watch their Continuity in Comic Books video. I posted a link down in the comments below. So let's jump right in. The thought is continuity in comic books. Is it important anymore? Is it even necessary anymore? If you don't know what we mean by continuity, I've mentioned a couple times how Wolverine jumps around all over the place from one book to one book to one book. He's in, New York, in Westchester with the X-Men here versus, across the sea with the Avengers there and in some other time-space dimension with the X-Force or whatever it may be. And obviously that is a continuity error because how can one guy be in many different places? So the thought is it even necessary anymore? Most of their video, they do talk about DC. Obviously, this is a Marvel channel, but I feel like there's a lot of bleed through there. In summation for their video, they felt that the idea is continuity is not important to comic books anymore. Just write good stories. And as I agree that I would love to just read good stories, I do feel that continuity is very important. I would say continuity makes good stories. So I have read a lot of Avengers. I've read every single Avenger, 1963 to 2019. I know the Avengers. And some of my favorite Avengers books are ones that reference old material. They did mention that this is one form of continuity that they feel is very important, where one character can reference the old and reference what has come, from the past. And that, as they said, I agree wholeheartedly. That is important because I love it when I'm reading a book and they mention something that happens in the past. Avengers Academy takes up residence at the West Coast Avengers compound. Stuff like that. Absolutely amazing. I also love sideways continuity. So back in 2018, when Peter Parker had Parker Industries and he was, super popular and super big, it was amazing because not just in his books there was the Parker Industries and whatnot, but any book that Spider-Man was in, that also followed. So the Avengers were holed up in Parker Industries building, etc., etc. But then as soon as Parker Industries imploded upon itself, there's a chain reaction throughout the comics, and that followed because you saw it, because it's one big shared universe, as I like. When it comes to characters that are, at this point extremely old in books, a lot of what they talked about was aging of characters. Does it make sense? Does it even matter? Should it be explained or should not be explained? Gets a little complicated because there are amazing characters that have been around since the 40s, since the 60s. At this point, if they aged according to their publication, they would be extremely old individuals, and we wouldn't be having the really cool comic books that we have now. Let's say Captain America, for example. Every 5 to 10 years, it seems like they just push back that time that he was in the ice and when he came out. Obviously, in the MCU, he came out right before the Avengers in 2012. But that's not accurate according to the Marvel 616 universe. In Avengers number 4 is when we see Captain America come out of the ice, which means he's been around since the 60s. But then there's some references in newer material that makes it sound like he doesn't understand references from the 80s or references from the 90s, though he obviously was around for those points. Things like that always frustrate me because it's very clear by reading this linear story of the 616 universe that Captain America has been around since the 60s. So why do we feel like it's necessary to retcon his history so that he came out of the ice at a different time than he did? It's not just Captain America, though. Let's take a look at my favorite character, Iron Man. In the MCU, it's the Middle East where he's injured and then he has to make the Iron Man costume. But then in some comics make it feel like it's in Vietnam. Some areas make it feel like it's different parts of the world based on the world events that are going on. Because the story of Tony Stark making the Iron Man armor has been adapted throughout the ages. So what is the true origin of Iron Man? It's hard to say because the continuity is all messed up and warbled and weird. Because you as a publisher and you as a reader don't want to drop your golden gooses, your Spider-Mans, your Fantastic Fours, your Iron Mans, your Captain Americas, because they have aged out, because they are too old. And I get that. I mean, I would love to keep reading Iron Man for the rest of my life because I love Tony Stark. But for me, I would actually really like them to take a step back and reimagine Marvel. So right now, there are characters all over the place that have been around forever. Again, they're just not aging. And, how do you explain that away in the comic book universe? When you're talking about the Thinking Critical video that we watched over here, they say it doesn't matter. Don't explain away because that hurts the story. That ruins the story. Why is Franklin Richards a baby and then a kid and then now has been a teenager for the past 20 years? What's his aging? Why isn't Reed Richards aging? Well, it's because XYZ. They don't like that because they feel, in this video that I watched, that it doesn't matter because it's just you want good stories. Again, I want to counter. I feel like continuity makes good stories. For example, Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos were around in World War II, just like Captain America. But now they're kicking around in the 60s and then later on. Why is the Howling Commandos and specifically Nick Fury still around? If we were going by Thinking Critical's idea, don't explain away, it doesn't matter. But I want to know. Captain America didn't age in the ice because comic books, but that's the reason. It was in the ice, so he did not age. Nick Fury wasn't in ice, so why didn't he age? Well, we can't just say because of comic books, even though that's how I explain a lot of things away. But they told us that it's because the Infinity Formula. It's similar to the Super Soldier Serum. It does not age him, but he's not, Captain America. And that made sense. It was a comic book answer, but it made sense. Now we know why Nick Fury doesn't age, but it doesn't give us the answers for everyone else. They also reference legacy characters. Now, this is a lot more prevalent, I would say, in DC, because there aren't as many legacy characters for Marvel that I can think of that aren't relatively new characters. Obviously, you've got brand new characters like Kamala Khan, Riri Williams, and, other young Avengers, champions, those younger generation heroes that I absolutely love. But for this, again, I'm going to reference back to this video. They're talking about Dick Grayson. Obviously, this is DC and this is a Marvel channel, but we'll talk about DC for just a little bit. Dick Grayson was the original Robin, but he's gone on to do his own thing and now is Nightwing. He is a 20 or 30-year-old man. So, reading the comic books, if you're seeing Dick Grayson age, but Batman doesn't, is that a problem for you as the reader? Personally, I would like to see them age. Now, I know that there are side books that show this kind of thing. Again, they reference this in the video. There are plenty of side books where you can have a tight continuity, where you can watch your characters age and move on so the continuity doesn't matter. But in the main books, why would you hurt your breadwinners just by saying, hey, they're going through their midlife crisis, hey, they're getting joint pains, they're aging out? I would love to see that. So, I'm rambling a little bit. Let's pull it back in. Continuity, is it important? Yes, I feel like it is extremely important because there's nothing better to me than when I'm reading a comic book and I can see the history behind these stories, so that I can see old characters brought back, that I can see important things happening. There's nothing worse to me than I'm reading a story and absolutely loving it, and then something happens, whether it's a shift in the writers or the publishers putting out a major event, and then all of a sudden that character or that story I'm reading is dropped completely and there's nothing to do with it again. Let me talk about a couple major examples for you. When I was reading the Agent Venom books, they were fantastic. Absolutely amazing. We had a couple writer changes, but they still felt very smooth, and the character story and development was there. But then 2012 hit, and with 2012 brought Avengers versus X-Men. What a fun story, but it did change some major things in comics because it ushered in a new era of comic books. Marvel Now. Now, with the Marvel Now rebranding, a ton of lines got cut and a ton of lines got re-pushed out. So what did that do? A lot of unfinished stories never saw the light of day. The Dark Avengers, which formerly was the Thunderbolts, ended on a high note and never to be seen again. Those characters to be thrown to the wind to something else. A new Thunderbolts line picked up shortly after that. In fact, we're going to talk about that new Thunderbolts line because Agent Venom was doing his own thing in Philadelphia. He had his own life. He had reimagined himself. He is doing heroics. Even had a sidekick of Mania. But because of the whole shift, next thing we know, we're reading Thunderbolts #1, which has Red Hulk and has a great lineup. But all of a sudden, Flash Thompson is in Iraq and not in Philadelphia. Why was he overseas? That didn't make sense. Now, it made sense to the writer who picked up the book. He's like, oh, Agent Venom, he's, with the military. He's obviously overseas. That makes no sense for the character based on what we were reading. I would have preferred even if they just went to Philadelphia and picked him up, that would have been perfect for me. Nothing's worse than when I'm reading a comic book and continuity gets in the way because people don't know how to share their lines. I understand that Wolverine is a popular character. I understand that you want to read Wolverine in many different books, whether it's X-Men, Avengers, you name it. But I prefer when things have a nice, tight continuity and I can follow everything. It used to be that way. Marvel back in the 60s and back in the early 70s was that way. You could follow a character easily, month by month by month, and it never happened so that they were in two books out at the same time. That didn't make sense. It was never that way. Comic books are a completely different industry than they were back in the 60s. So can we have this tight continuity that we did back in the day today? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no. I think that, unfortunately, they are probably right over at Thinking Critical and saying that it is not possible to have the tight continuity that you used to have in comic books, the kind of continuity I want to see in comic books, because there are characters that are just too popular. Iron Man is not going to be in only one book. Iron Man is not going to be only in one place. And the way stories are written now are completely different. Way back in the 60s, reading one issue was one nice contained story. So if Iron Man was in New York for this story, and then in his own book he was in California, that was fine because it was one contained story. Versus now, a story spans over 10 issues. So, and those 10 issues can be in different galaxies, or different dimensions, or different realms, or wherever. So I could be reading Avengers and Iron Man is over in Asgard wrecking stuff up, but then I'm reading Stark Industries books and he's, in New York. Obviously that continuity doesn't make sense. It's easy while reading comic books just to read for the story, and I get what they're saying. Just make good stories. I wish that comic books would be a tight continuity so that good stories meant a good tight continuity. I don't want to read where Wolverine is everywhere. I don't want to read where Captain America or Iron Man's everywhere. I also would like to see these characters age out. Now, I know I'm talking sacrilege, but I kind of would be very okay if a character ages out or dies just let them stay dead. These characters have been used and reused for a long time. And I know the medium that I'm talking about, and I have read the medium I'm talking about. So I know that when I'm saying just keep them dead, that's not going to happen. But let's talk a perfect world according to Drew. A perfect world according to Drew is we have a very tight continuity. We have a very tight timeline, and there could be some crazy shenanigans. There could be some whatevers, but I feel like it'd be more impactful if some characters just stayed dead, just stayed gone, or aged out. They give us legacy characters like Riri Williams. Riri Williams, for all intents and purposes, was Iron Man for a long time in her run. Not even her run, in the Iron Man book. Iron Man was dead. Iron Man was gone and lost. Riri Williams was Ironheart. Riri Williams was Iron Man. Doctor Doom was the Iron Man. There was no Tony Stark Iron Man during this time period. But then, new writer, new book, and all of a sudden, he's back and, it's like nothing happened. Riri is off with the champions, barely doing anything, and then she picks up her own book, and it's okay, but it's not the same. I'd be okay seeing these characters age out. Why don't we have Tony Stark and Riri Williams share the same book? Why don't we see Iron Man start to age out? Riri Williams is just as smart, if not smarter, than Iron Man. So why can't her technology catch up and then surpass Tony's? That would be an amazing book to read. That would be something I would enjoy reading. One of the things I love about Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead is it was linear. Obviously, it was only one line, so it wasn't super difficult to just keep reading, but it was one long story. The characters did age. That was amazing comic books. I think it is possible to do that with the big two, but again, we're not even going to talk about DC. I think that is possible to do with Marvel, but we're going to have to change the way comic books are being read, change the way comic books are being written and produced today. So, perfect world, according to Drew, we'll get back to this, one tight continuity. But important to that, I don't want 50 Marvel books a month. I want 20 Marvel books a month. 15. I'd even be okay with 10 Marvel books 1 month. That way, it is so easy to follow a character. You know exactly where they're going. Way back in the day, we had these little asterisks at the bottom that said, hey, if you want more information, or we last saw this character here, let's get back to that. So I can follow a character, and I can pick up a new character and see like, hey, this guy's cool, and follow his story without feeling that I'm missing out because he appears in 10 different books all at once. Let's go back to 10 books in 1 month. Have them be phenomenal stories. Let's only have one Avengers book. Let's only have one X-Men book. I don't need 20 books about X-Men. I don't need 20 books about the Avengers. In fact, when I was reading the Avengers, it got a lot worse after 2012 because there were so many side Avengers that it was so bogged down, and so many of them were completely worthless to the overarching story. Let's get back to a time when there was only a handful of books so that I can follow my characters and follow the story of Marvel. With that tight continuity, let's not have 20 different doppelgangers of the same character doing something all over the place. Let's have it in one spot. I know that that's not the way comic books are done right now, but I would love to see it that way. I would be 100% okay knocking down to just the core of Marvel so that I could read just the core of Marvel. And that way crossover events would really feel like giant crossover events. All the lines can be involved and have it intricately involved with that story and have major repercussions. Because the way it is right now, a crossover event will happen and then it will just kind of pass. And some characters might be impacted, but some might not at all. And I don't understand why the world could be in such major peril one day and then everything be hunky-dory the next. Or let's go with Civil War. Civil War was a huge event, massive event. it changed a lot of things. Captain America died. Tony Stark is director of S.H.I.E.L.D. There were some major consequences to that event, and it's why it's one of my favorites. But there are some factions of Marvel where it didn't even really affect them at all. Like the X-Men. Sure, there is an X-Men Civil War crossover, but if that book was never read, it's like nothing happened. Why were they even involved? They weren't. And why weren't they involved? This is a huge thing going on. So superhuman registration is very similar to mutant registration. Why weren't the X-Men involved? I want events to have major impacts on the Marvel Universe. I've been talking for a while, so let's start to pull it back and just bring it down to a couple major bullet points. Is continuity important? Yes, I think continuity is extremely important. I prefer reading a book with the strong, tight continuity where I can follow my characters from event to event, from decision to decision, from book to book. Do I think that the big two, or specifically Marvel, is ever going to get to a point where it was in the 60s where continuity was extremely important? No, I don't think that is actually going to happen. That's what I may want. That's what I know a couple other people want, but I don't think that that's actually going to happen because with the movies and with the toys and with the cartoons and the comics and everything going on, there are some characters that are just way too important to be relegated to only one line. If you know that someone's going to read every book that has Iron Man in it, why wouldn't you put it in 40 books a month? So I don't see Marvel ever getting back to the way it was in the 60s. I would like that to happen. I would prefer that to happen, but I don't see that actually happening. Should characters age out? Yes, I think they should. I think it is better for the story if certain characters actually show improvement and growth. One of my favorite lines of the Marvel Now was the All New X-Men. All New X-Men was an amazing line because it pulled young X-Men and showed them in contrast to the world today. X-Men that were alive in the 60s in the 2012 Marvel Now universe, seeing their counterparts all grown up. That was an amazing contrast, and that would not happen if they were perpetually 15. So I think it is important that characters do age out. Now, should they age out to retirement? That is your call. 100% your call. That is, I'm going to say, the viewer, the reader's call, because my opinion might not be the most popular one, because I'd be okay seeing characters rotate out. There are plenty of new people and plenty of new characters that have been and could be and will be introduced, but they never get the full focus that they deserve because they're always overshadowed by the major players of the Marvel Universe that have never gone anywhere. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Hulk, Cyclops, they have all always been there in the staple of their books, so any new characters that have come out have either come and made a big splash for a year, maybe two, and then fizzled out to nothing, or just never really caught on because why do I care about Eric Masters' Thunderstrike when I have Thor Odinson? Why do I care about, XYZ when ABC is already here? So I think it's important that characters age out. One more reference back to the video. Thinking Critical says that Peter Parker will never age and we should be okay with that. I counter that he has aged. And for a long time in Marvel, that was a big deal. Peter Parker started as a high school student, but has been a major CEO of a company, has been married and then not married and then married, and maybe we shouldn't get into the Mephisto of it all. But it is important that Peter Parker has aged because we get to see his growth. Now, is Peter Parker ever going to age out of his herodom? Is Spider-Man ever going to be too old to be Spider-Man? Probably not. Spider-Man is too important, and yes, we do have Miles Morales, and who's a very big player in the comic book industry right now, but no, I don't see a point where Earth 616 will ever not have Peter Parker Spider-Man. It was really cool in the Ultimates that we saw a Marvel Universe without Peter Parker Spider-Man. It's really cool watching Into the Spider-Verse or reading the Spider-Verse books with different Spider characters from all over the multiverse. But will 616 ever be without a Peter Parker Spider-Man? No, it's not going to happen. It may happen for a time, and there are some times when it's done, it's been done phenomenally. For example, we're going to talk again about Marvel Now. When Otto Octavius took over the brain of Peter Parker and became the superior Spider-Man, that technically was a time without Peter Parker Spider-Man. But there still was a Spider-Man. And guess what? Spider-Man came back. Peter Parker came back. So I don't see there being a time, being a place when we are not going to have, the Iron Man, the Mr. Fantastic, the Spider-Man, the whatever, for a long time. They may go away, but they will always come back. I think that's just going to be the way it is. I do want to hear from you, though. This has been a long video, so I thank you very much for making it to the end. But what do you think about comic book and comic book continuity? Let me know in the comments down below. Let's have a discussion about this. Is it important to you that a character references old material? Or is it important to you that a writer is free to create the stories that they want without being bogged down with 80 years of history that they have to try to tie into? Do you think it's important that a publisher keeps a tight continuity so that the Wolverine of it all doesn't happen again? Or do you think it's important that writers have the freedom to create a story with the entire repertoire of the Marvel Universe? Doesn't matter month to month where a certain character is. I would like to hear from you. And finally, Thinking Critical, thank you so much for making the video about comic book continuity. It was incredibly fun to watch. If you have viewed this, let me know in the comments below, what do you think about this reactionary video? Thank you so much for putting out the video in the first place. I do appreciate it. You have a great channel. Thank you so much for your content. And as always, guys, thank you for watching the video and thank you for supporting the channel. If you could just do me a favor, like this video, subscribe for all future content, and share with your friends. Thank you guys so much. Excelsior, true believers. Till next time.